single and living alone in her ranch-style home. She walked out to her living room to check things out. She didn't see or hear anything out of the ordinary, so she decided to make sure her front door and windows were locked. The door was locked, and the first window she checked was locked. When she lifted the blinds on the second window, it was wide open, and a guy in a ski mask was standing there. She said he laughed, this evil laugh, and he said, "Party time." Then he started to climb inside. She screamed that she had a gun, and then her dog started barking like crazy. The guy decided to run off. My aunt did get a gun after that, and learned how to use it. I can't even think about what would have happened to her if she didn't have her dog to warn her. Story number 2. So this happened about 11 years ago when I was a senior in high school. It was mid-December. I am from Iowa, and the winters here get cold at night. Like if you get stuck outside you will die kind of cold. That plus the snowfall makes everything dead silent. You can hear anything and everything inside the house, and even immediately outside of it. While me and my best friend were hanging out in my family's walkout basement, just having a boring night playing video games, we were the only ones at home. My mother had gone straight from work to a bar to grab a few drinks with co-workers, so me and my friend thought it would be cool to break into the family wine and live a little. As we were sitting there opening up the first bottle, I heard the door to the garage open and slam shut. I immediately started looking for places to hide the bottle. My friend then says, "I thought you said your mum was supposed to be out all night." "She was," I replied. I then heard a few heavy stomps, and my mother's voice yelled out my name. "Anyone home?" she said. I yell back up the stairs. "Yeah, just hanging out in the basement." I hear a few more steps move from the garage door towards the stairs. She yells out again, "Can you come help me with something? I need you up here." I reply back while frantically trying to find a good place to hide the wine bottle. "Yeah, just give me a minute." Then there was silence for about 20 seconds. "Anyone down there with you?" she said in a more concerned, serious tone, in a voice that was slightly off of my mother's. This was the first thing that told me something wasn't right. Our family never cared if anyone was over, as our house was always very open to all family and friends. steps to the next floor. Now, as I was walking up the steps, I couldn't help but feel the overbearing silence of the house, and the slight feeling that something wasn't right. When I got to the top of the steps, I looked over to the garage door and also the kitchen right next to it. It's black, pitch black. All of the lights were off, and there was no moonlight shining through any of the windows. I walked over to the kitchen yelling out, "Mom, where are you?" There was no reply, just silence and darkness. I felt my adrenaline kicking in full force. I have to get out of here as fast as possible, I thought. My mother was not home. I ran back down the stairs, grabbing my coat along the way. "What's wrong?" Colton asked. "My mom's not home," I replied quickly, looking for my truck keys. "What do you mean? You were just talking with her?" I could see the confusion in his face. "There's no one home. We need to leave now." I took a few steps towards the back door that opens up to the yard, and then I see my dog shaking on the couch, and my cat growling behind it. I couldn't leave them. I just knew that if we left, something would happen. "Are we leaving?" Colton said, still confused. "No, I can't leave them here alone. Something is really off. I'm going to call my mom and figure this out." I pull out my phone and call my mom. She picks up immediately and asks what's going on. I said, "Mom, were you just home? I heard you yelling for me from the second level, and when I went up you weren't there," I said frantically, hoping that she was playing a joke. "No, I'm just leaving the bar. Are you okay?" "What do you mean you heard me?" I told her the whole story and she rushed home. Colton and I stayed in the basement with the animals until she arrived. But before she did, you could hear something up the stairs. Not walking or sitting on things, but a pressure in the air, like a black hole was slowly moving from one room to the next. I could only describe it as hungry. When she got home, you could feel the thing leave just as quickly as it came, like an overbearing, evil presence had just flown away. We still have never figured out what the hell was going on. And this is just one story of many unexplainable things that have happened to us. My mother has passed away now, and I moved away. But whenever I go back to was a story that took place quite a few years back now. However, it still baffles me completely. I'm a teenager and I've been in Boy Scouts for nearly all my life. A few years ago, me and two others, Amy and Harriet, were asked to head into the woods surrounding our campsite to find a long, straight stick suitable for carving into a point. I was the youngest, Harriet was older, and Amy was 1 year older than myself. We had been walking deliberately in the same direction so we wouldn't get lost, and memorizing the surroundings as we went in order to find our way back easily. About 15 minutes in, we couldn't find anything to take back, so we turned around to go back to the campsite. That's when the initial panic set in. The trees had almost unnaturally knitted themselves together in such a way that it seemed our path was never there, like it had just vanished. We looked around 360 degrees, and now everything looked exactly the same. Trees we could have sworn were different from one another, appeared all as exact copies of the same tree. We kept walking in what we thought to be the right direction, while shouting for help, and eventually came to a concrete path, almost like a road, but very thin, separating the forest into two. We didn't follow the road as it went in the wrong direction from our campsite. On the other side of the path was more forest. However, nearby was an abandoned shack, likely used for storage. We just kept walking and eventually came to a road we didn't recognize. A woman wearing a pink and purple coat walked past, and we frantically asked her for the direction of our campsite. At this point, according to our watches and Harriet's phone, we'd been walking for an hour and a half. The lady said there's a campsite in that direction. We followed her advice and eventually came back to our campsite. We apologized for taking so long and that we couldn't find anything. The leader, Ian, could see all three of us were shaken up, and he said with confusion that we'd only been gone 25 minutes and that our free time was still going on. To this day, it baffles all three of us, as our free time was 40 minutes long, and our watches and phones had said we'd been gone for hours. The forest we were lost in felt crushing and claustrophobic, like we entered an area that the concept of time did not apply to. It literally was as if we were in a time vortex or something. The feeling was very strange, and it has stuck with me since. Moving on to story number 4. This is probably the creepiest, most unexplainable thing that has ever happened to me. I used to work overnight as a security guard at the local port. Usually none of the port workers would stay overnight, except for the safety official. The site had a radius of nearly 2 miles. Overnight, usually there would be 3 guards, including me. There were different posts, but the front gate was the main entrance area, where all of the guards would be stationed overnight, since there was no need to put them in other posts, as there were no activity during this time. The older guards that have been there for years would often say the site was haunted, and there have been accidents and deaths in the area a long time ago. I was aware that people died there due to freak accidents, but I always thought that the superiors were just messing with the new guys. I would work 5 to 6 nights out of the week, and for the first few weeks, I never really saw or heard anything out of the ordinary, except for maybe a few misplaced objects while doing my patrol rounds, but nothing too crazy. On occasion, when there were big projects being constructed, the workers would sometimes stay overnight, or even for a few days. So there's a gym on the site for their convenience. This gym is fairly old. In the gym there's a sauna, weights, and a racquetball court. Usually on our patrol rounds, me and one of the other guards, Mike, would stop by the gym and play a few rounds of racquetball before returning back to the front gate. On one of those nights, me and Mike decided to do a full workout instead of playing racquetball in the cage. This was around 2:30 a.m. and the entire building was so quiet that you could hear the electricity running through the lights. The air conditioner is off, and so is everything else. The only thing that's running are the lights. 15 to 20 minutes into the workout, we hear a loud thump. We crossed it off as nothing and continued working out. Then, after a few more minutes, we hear the loud thump once more. At first we thought it was our lieutenant, who could have been walking around, but we radioed him and he told us he was at the front gate. As we sprinted full speed back to the front gate, the lieutenant saw us and asked why we were screaming and running. We told him what we witnessed, and his facial expression scared us even more. He said, "That's why there's always guards that quit often. There's something evil in the area, and it's not the first time something bad has happened here." He then proceeded to show us security footage of dark figures and shadows literally passing through the office areas, and lights mysteriously switching on and off. I still get chills remembering this experience, even right now as I'm typing this. I have never had a real encounter with the supernatural until that night. Many say that it was a demonic presence messing around. Others say it was a ghost of a dead person who died in the area. I don't know what it was, but I didn't last long in the job after that. There were other experiences too, but I'll post them another time. On to the next story. This is my first post, and it is a true story. I was living in a rural area in Oklahoma with my mother at a small lake house. I was probably 10 or 11 at this time. One night, I'm sleeping in my room when I abruptly woke up for no reason. This was not normal for me, and I felt very uneasy. The only sound I could hear was my mother snoring in the next room on the couch. I rolled over and tried to go back to sleep, but I needed to use the bathroom, so I grudgingly started to head that way. The bathroom is on the other side of the house, around a corner, past the kitchen, then down a long hallway on the right. So after I made the trip and finished my business, I flipped off the light switch and started heading back to bed. That's when I heard the distinct click of the lights switching on again, and I saw the glow of the bathroom light in the hallway. Terrified, I slowly turned around just to witness the light in the bathroom start clicking on and off. Click, 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 click. Finally, it shut completely off. In the dark of the hallway, my eyes began to make out a white shape near the end of the hall. It was around my size and crouched on the floor. At this point, I'm frozen to the spot as my mind begins realizing that no one else is home except me and my mom. Then the white shape began whispering in a man's voice. "Help me, I'm lost," it said. I remember wanting to scream for my mom, but I couldn't. And instead I barely said, "No." She grabbed me by the arms and pulled me into my room, slamming the door. She holds me in her arms with her back pressed against the door as we listened. It sounded like this thing was running around in circles in the kitchen. We could hear hands and feet slapping against the tiles. The kitchen had a sliding glass door to the outside, which sounded like it was thrown open, then slammed. We sat there, horrified, until daybreak. I was sent to my grandmother's in the next town for a while after that, and never set foot in that house again. Years later, my mother said she went walking around the property after the incident and came across a small burial site with 3 headstones, each belonging to children from the early 1900s. It freaks me out because what I heard that night was a man's voice, but it was so unnatural. My mom still will not tell me what she saw behind me and what it was that made her scream. She tells me she's afraid it will know we're talking about it, and it will come back if we do. This is the first of many weird things that have happened in my life. On to the next story. So last night, I was at a classmate's house, working on a group project we have due tomorrow. I live in an apartment in the town where our university is located, and my classmate lives at his parents' house, which is in the foothills just outside of town. To get to his house, you have to drive along a relatively secluded and narrow 2-lane road for about 6 miles. I left his house pretty late at night, around 11 p.m., and started down the road back towards town. I didn't realize how tough it would be to navigate the road at night. There were no streetlights, and the road was unkempt and riddled with potholes. On top of this, I had no cell service, so I had to drive very slowly to make sure I didn't blow out one of my tires, since I had used my spare a couple of weeks back. I figured I was about 3 miles from home when I rounded a tight corner and saw a pickup truck with a camper shell parked diagonally across the road. The way it was parked completely blocked my path. I couldn't drive around it because there was a gully on both sides of the road. The only way for me to go was backwards, where there was a pull-off that I could use to turn my car around. At first I couldn't see inside the truck's cab, but when I turned on my high beams, I saw that there was a man slouched over in the driver's seat, his head much problem. I decided to go back to my classmate's house and explain what was going on. I threw the car into reverse and kept looking back and forth between the rear view and the truck. I looked and saw that I was almost to the pull-off where I could turn around. When I looked back, my heart skipped about 5 beats. The man who had been slouched over in the driver's seat was now walking to my car at a hurried pace, while a few other men jumped out of the camper shell and started to move towards me as well. I panicked and accelerated backwards into the pull-off, which messed up the undercarriage of my car pretty badly. As I put it into drive, the guy was already at my passenger side door, tugging on the handle, which, thank the Lord, was locked. I only caught a brief glimpse of him, but his face appeared to be scabbed and leathery. Definitely a meth head or some sort of drug abuser. I sped away and didn't slow down at all until I reached the house, constantly checking my rear view to see if they were following. Thankfully, they didn't tail me, and when I reached the house, I explained what had happened to my classmate, and we called the cops. I was grateful that my buddy's parents were kind enough to let me stay the night. They didn't find anyone on the road matching the description, but I filed an incident report, and they told me they would be on the lookout for similar suspicious vehicles. Story number 7. One day when I was in elementary school, probably 3rd or 4th grade, I was awoken by my mom in a rush. She had overslept that day, and since she always woke me up in the morning, this meant that I also overslept, and now there was no way I was gonna be ready for school early enough to get on the school bus. School started at 8 a.m. and my bus pickup time was 7, but it was already like 6:40. I was still in my pajamas and hadn't had breakfast yet. So Mum decided that today we would just tell the bus driver to go on ahead and she would take me to school, which would give me plenty of time to get ready. So I'm sitting there at the dining room table, eating breakfast in my pajamas, and it's now about 6:50. We hear the bus pull up about 10 minutes earlier than usual. My mum peeks her head out of the door and waves the bus to go on. She closes the door and comes back inside, but the bus does not pull away. There's a knock at the door. My mom opens it to find a man in a bus driver uniform. He explains that he's a substitute driver because the regular driver called in sick. He says he knows he's a few minutes early because he wanted to get an early start on the route since he didn't know it well. Mum says that she was going to take me to school since we woke up late. He gets visibly upset and says that he can wait a few minutes since he's already running ahead of schedule. My mom insists that no, I won't be ready to go in a few minutes and tells him to go on ahead. He seemed angry about this, but turned around, got back on the bus and left. I returned to eating my breakfast and still don't have my school clothes on at this point. But then at 7 sharp, another bus pulls up to my house. Mum thinks this is weird and goes outside to talk to them. She comes back inside looking terrified, but doesn't really say anything about it and tells me to finish getting ready. At the time I didn't know what happened, but she ended up telling me a few years later. When she went out to the second bus, she found it was being driven by my regular bus driver, and it was full of all the other kids that are usually on the route, whereas the other bus had been empty. Mum asked the driver about the substitute driver and about him calling in sick. I never called in sick. There is no substitute driver on my route, he said. The driver immediately called dispatch in a panic and told my mum to go inside and call the police to report the incident. There was absolutely no one doing my driver's route that day. Whoever this was most likely a kidnapper who had targeted me. I never heard anything about it again. No one else ended up being picked up by this fake bus driver. But chances are, if I had gotten on that bus, I would have never made it to school or back home. And if Mum had not overslept on that specific day, I would have definitely been on that bus. Story number 8. Here is a story I have never told anyone. I was a young gay man in my early 20s, living in a medium-sized city in the Midwestern US. The year was 1998. This was a sort of transitional time for gay people. In most populous areas, we had enough respect to live openly, but there was still plenty of people who did not like us. It was before the invention of smartphones, and the internet was in this to happen to anyone else. I saw you were talking to him, so be careful and stay away from him. That's strange, I thought. What does this person mean by really hurt him? I responded to the email asking what exactly happened, but never got a response. I kept it in the back of my mind, but pretty much shrugged it off. Several weeks later, I had a weekday off work and decided to go to the internet to find a hookup, as was my custom. I had an email response to a personal ad. It was Slim Guy 65. He was offering to meet at his place to hang out and have a good time. Nothing about this guy was really sounding interesting to me, but I had no other offers that day, so I decided, why not? I arrived at the house at the agreed time. It was the middle of the afternoon. There was plenty of traffic on the street, and the occasional person out on their porch. I pulled up the driveway behind the house and knocked on the door. The guy that answered was a pretty normal, kind of mousy-looking man, probably in his 40s. Slight, slim build, looked like any guy working in an office cubicle somewhere. Not really my type, but my curiosity was piqued, so I went inside to look around. I stepped through the back door into the kitchen. It was very clean, and there was nothing out on the counters. No tables or chairs or anything. It did not look like someone was living there. Slim Guy 65 said, "This isn't where I live. A friend of mine used to run a doctor's office here. I maintain the building for him. It's private though. We have the place to ourselves." He then shut the back door and locked it with a key deadbolt and put his keys back in his pocket, saying, "So what do you want to do?" At this point, my danger sense spiked. I asked him why he was locking the door like that, which immediately flustered him. He was looking rather nervous, and his voice was a little wavery and halting. He said, well, we don't want someone to come in and interrupt us, right?" Flashing a weak, unconvincing smile. His demeanor and body language were all I needed to confirm that this guy was hiding something. However, I could tell that I was intimidating him. I was not particularly muscular, but I have a larger frame and a resting face that makes me look like a thug. I put on my best steely face and told him to unlock the door. He looked for a moment like he was going to pee his pants. Then he said, "Okay, alright, I'll unlock this, and I'll just lock the knob here." He turned the little dial that locks the doorknob. I was almost in fight or flight mode, unsure of exactly what to do. kitchen into what would normally be the living room, and towards the wall to the right. I hesitated, thinking I should just walk out, but I was too curious. Also, I was confident that I could take him in a fight, so I slowly headed toward the living room. From the kitchen entrance, I could see a large rectangular stainless steel table in the living room. I remember thinking it looked like a surgical table. In hindsight, I now know that it was 100% a mortician's table. The large front window looking out onto the street was covered by vertical blinds that were closed. The hallway revealed the room setup that I expected. The first bedroom door was closed. The second door was open to a small, very clean bathroom. At the end of the hall was the other bedroom. He said, "We can go in that room if you want. Go ahead, take a look." He stayed by the other closed bedroom door. The back bedroom door was open, and I could see that the walls were covered in wood paneling. I slowly took a few steps towards that door. When I got to the room, the first thing I noticed was the door had a keyed deadbolt lock, like the back door. This room locked from the outside. I saw a plastic desk chair in the middle of the room. The room had old dark carpet, and the walls were completely panelled with no windows. And I know that room must have at least one window, probably two. So whoever did that panelling went over the windows. There was also an old office phone in there, plugged in on the floor. There was nothing else in the room. I was standing at the threshold of that room, with one foot slightly in, absolutely not going past the doorway. I looked back at the dude. He was still standing by that other door, just nervously smiling at me, trying hard to look casual. He said something like, "Well, what do you want to do?" It dawned on me that I did not see a light switch anywhere. It should have been just inside the door, but was covered up by the paneling. I turned back to face the guy and just said, "What is it that you want to do here?" My skin had gone ice cold as I realized I was way too far into this apartment. I was running through options in my head. What is this guy going to do? He doesn't appear to have a weapon, but who knows what goes on in this place? I repeated, "What are you trying to do?" He was almost totally derailed by that. He stammered, "Some hot man-to-man fun," with the weakest smile I've ever seen, almost panicking. That sounds comical, but really that's off the light from somewhere and calls the phone. The friend of the person who emailed me must have gotten locked up for whatever game ensued. Around 2002, there was a murder of a young man on the news. He'd been found in the next state, which borders on my city. I recognized him from the gay community, but did not know him personally. A few young men had gone missing over the past year, each after being at one specific dive bar, and each being found several miles to the north, past the state line, and out in the country. I had to wonder if my acquaintance from the internet had anything